Our first reader is Trudy J. Morgan Cole, reading from the second book in her Cupids trilogy, Such Miracles and Mischiefs. This historical fiction book takes off where the first in the trilogy, A Roll of the Bones, leaves off. It adventures across the first 3 English colonies in the Americas, Newfoundland, Virginia, and Bermuda, and highlights women's colonial experience. Nancy Ellis needs all her ingenuity to survive in the hands of lawless men. Ned Perry crosses the ocean to find her, while Nancy's employer and friend, Kathryn Guy, must rebuild a home on the harsh shores of the Newfoundland. Patty Musgrave-Quinn said in Atlantic Books Today that this novel is a special opportunity and one that Newfoundlanders will be particularly proud of. Trudy J. Morgan Cole is a writer and teacher in St. John's, Newfoundland. Her historical novels include By the Rivers of Brooklyn, Most Anything You Please, A Sudden Sun, and That Forgetful Shore. She's fascinated by the forgotten or ignored stories of women in history and loves to create fiction out of the gaps history leaves behind. Trudy is the mother of 2 young adults and lives in Rabbittown in the heart of St. John's with her husband, Jason, and the world's most beautiful rescue dog. Please welcome Trudy.
Hi, I'm Trudy Morgan Cole, and I'm reading a scene from my novel, Such Miracles and Mischiefs, Book 2 of the Cupids trilogy. The wood Nancy stood in was a strange one. The trees were not like those around Cupid's Cove, the only forest she had ever seen till now. They were much taller and had a sweet, unfamiliar scent. They were sparse near the shore, but grew closer together as she pushed farther in, through dense shrubs and bushes. This country, whatever it was verdant and fertile, and the ground seemed dark and rich. There was a sultry warmth to the air. They must be much farther south than the Newfoundland. Before she left Bristol, if she had ever imagined being on a ship at sea, being wrecked on a foreign shore, a fantastical enough conceit in itself, she would have been certain that a little walking would bring her to a town or village, for people were everywhere. Now, after a year in the Newfoundland, she knew that was true only in England. In the New World, there could be miles and miles of shoreline or forest with no settlement at all. There were the natives, of course, somewhere deep in the woods. But as she had never seen one herself in a whole year in Cupid's Cove, they seemed as alien as talking beasts or the men whose heads grew beneath their shoulders, the fantastical creatures of sailors' tales. Even as these thoughts ran through her head, she was walking along a path that led through the trees away from the shore. Surely the very fact that there was a path must mean there were men here as well, though animals might make paths through the bush. Large animals. She chilled at the thought. The light was dim, filtered through the trees, and now she thought she could hear the sounds of someone or something else moving through the forest. Was it a wild beast? Or one of the pirates coming after her? Or some other person who dwelt on these shores? She wondered if there were people here. What manner of people they would be. They might be Spaniards, or French, or Dutch, or the natives of the country. If they were English, she would need a name and a story, but anyone else would only see her as a ragged, English-speaking boy and deal with her accordingly. She had been walking through the forest now for, could it be about half an hour? It was hard to tell, and she could barely see the sun. She was tired and thirsty, but more pressing than either of those was the fact that she was now sure she could hear someone else. Not behind her on the path, thankfully, but somewhere off to the side. And then she stumbled through trees into a clearing, and he was waiting for her, a knife in his hand. Nancy realized she had her knife in her hand also. When had she taken it from her belt? She faced the stranger, each of them wary. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and his eyes glittered at her from a dark face. Then in a flash, she recognized him. "You," she said, trying to drop her voice to sound less like a woman's. "You were one of the captives aboard the ship." He lifted his hands slowly and spread them wide. "No chains now. You will not try to make me serve you. Will you cook?" He laughed. She hesitated, then put the knife back into the sheath on her belt. "You know me." "You are trying to look like a sailor?" "I thought to, yes." He laughed again. "You look like a maid in breeches. But you might fool a stranger in the dark." His voice was very deep and his accent unfamiliar. Not quite like those of the Spanish sailors whose cries she remembered, but something like them. "Where are you going?" She wondered how he had got free of his shackles to escape the ship. He had sheathed his knife too, and his posture was easy now. As you are, I think, as far from those men as I can get. You were their captive also? Yes, they took me from my home. He gestured for her to come closer, and she did, standing beside him on the path now. It may be safer for us to travel together. Do you think there's a town about anywhere? Do you know where we are? He shook his head. I lived one time in Cuba and sometime in Santo Domingo. I do not think this is a place I've seen before. There are many islands in the southern seas. I know nothing of these parts at all, Nancy admitted. I was born in Bristol, in England, and went straight from there to the Newfoundland, to a place called Cupids Cove. Ah, those places are all far in the north, where the sea and air are cold. This is a kinder land, though the men are no kinder. He was silent a moment, looking at her, then said, It may be you fear a man of my complexion more than you fear pirates? Nancy had nothing to say to that. Save for this man and his fellow slaves on the ship, she had never been close enough to a black man to speak to him. There had been Africans among the lively mix of men on the Bristol docks, but she knew nothing of them. She thought of saying, I fear no man, and then, I fear every man. One felt as true as the other.